Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and good morning for those of you on the West Coast or even further west. Thanks for joining us today for the informational webinar on the Acadia Science Fellowship. I'm Nick Fisichella, the President and CEO with Schoodic Institute, and we also have Jesse Wheeler with us from National Park Service, and Catherine Schmidt will be running the board here today, so to speak, and she'll be moderating the chat. And so please do use the chat for questions that arise during the presentation, and then we will have a chance at the end for a Q&A and discussion, make sure we answer any questions that you have. All right, so the Acadia Science Fellowship, it's a partnership between Schoodic Institute and the National Park Service with support from the David Evans Shaw Family Foundation and the Sibley Saltonstall Family Foundation, as well as individual donors. So first, just a little background on Acadia National Park and Schoodic Institute, and then we'll talk about the Science Fellowship. Jesse, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Jesse Wheeler. I'm the vegetation biologist at Acadia National Park. And I've had an opportunity to work with several previous fellows, so this is a really fantastic program. And I thought maybe we'd start with what about Acadia National Park? What about the National Park Service, and why we're here? So some folks may be familiar with the mission of the park system to protect natural and cultural resources. What's really interesting and unique about Acadia National Park, when it was created, the enabling legislation in 1916 really states that the purpose for this place being a park, part of that is for scientific values and scientific research and integrity. So in addition to kind of what those protections of resources are, having a kind of scientific inquiry is a big part of that, and that's why we're here.
Great, thank you, Jesse. And then Schoodic Institute, where we are Acadia's primary partner in science and education, and our mission is to be a center for inspiring science, learning, and community for a changing world. And so together our two organizations co-lead the Research Learning Center here in the park, with our campus being on the Schoodic Peninsula. And really, our role together is to try to increase the effectiveness and communication of research in Acadia, to really extend the capacity for science and communication and education, and then really together to achieve that original founder's vision, as Jesse shared with you, that science is really part of the park's purpose. And really a theme for our work is environmental change, or rapid change, that's happening here in Acadia, and telling the science and stories, or telling about the science and telling the stories of that here in the park. And so integrating scientific research and learning, engagement and communication, and really trying to understand change and inform stewardship of this special place. So that's just a little background on Acadia National Park Service and Schoodic Institute partnership here. And now we'll talk a little bit about the Acadia Science Fellowship, a little overview, and then some details into it. So this fellowship program, it's building on the success of Second Century Stewardship, which is the fellowship program we've had over the last 8 years, brought about 20 fellows to do work here with us in Acadia. And we want to continue that and to really foster original research. So we want to help bring you and your creativity and talents to bear on stewardship challenges in Acadia. And so really the goals of this fellowship program, to support stewardship through original scientific research, and to raise public understanding and awareness and support for science. Of course, certainly so here in Acadia, but but more broadly as well, and increase that public engagement with science. And so this fellowship program, we hope to support 2 new fellows in 2024 that again will be informing park management, helping to tell the stories of science in Acadia, and hopefully establishing long-term research here, and just collaborations really more specifically with us here in Acadia. And science communication is really an important piece to the fellowship program and to all of our work that we're doing together. And that national parks are a great platform for communications, and we're trying to really take advantage of that. And so as part of the fellowship, there is science communication training, actually led by Catherine Schmidt, who's with us on the webinar today, and then working with you on appropriate channels and communications, and really helping you to build your communication skills and to hone those, and to help tell the stories of the original research that you're leading. And who should apply for the fellowship? The answer is you should apply. It's really open quite broadly. We encourage early career scientists, postdoctoral researchers, advanced graduate students, but they're just encouraged. So it's really open to any scientist, anyone. You have to be in the US legally, at least 18 years of age. The one thing you cannot be, or the 2 things you cannot be, are a National Park Service employee or a Schoodic Institute employee. You also cannot be a previous second century stewardship fellow. But any questions on who should apply, do just let us know, or you can type in the chat box. The applications for this grant opportunity are fairly standard. Our goal is to not make it onerous, either for you to write and to justify what you'd like to do, or for us to review and rate the proposal. So they're pretty standard. The project narrative is 3 pages. It's purposefully short. You have to try to communicate well in just 3 pages what you're trying to do. There is a communication narrative where we'd like just to hear about your interest in science communication. We don't expect everyone to be a skilled science communicator right off the bat, but it's really more about better understanding your interest in communicating science. And again, the RFP has the full details. I hope you've had a look at that, but please do review that for more information. The fellowship includes the award. It's up to $30,000 for the total award. This is one of the changes from our Second Century Stewardship Fellowship, where we're increasing the award amount, for a couple of reasons. One, to just keep up with inflation. 2, with the recognition that often these research projects take more than 1 year to complete. The co-production model of working with managers, establishing field research, can often take a little bit of time. We recognize that, and want to make sure to help support your efforts within this fellowship. Although we've increased the award amount, we also recognize there's probably multiple other sources of funding you may be using for your project. And so in the budget and budget justification, just laying out how this funding is being used it is important, and just when we recognize that you're going to be using other sources potentially as well for the project. We do provide housing, so overnight accommodations at Schoodic Institute are available as part of the fellowship. And then again, the communications training that I mentioned that Catherine leads. So you just have to make time for that. Evaluation criteria, again, are pretty standard here. Intellectual merit of the research. This is we really want to support, and we will support science research that's informing park management. So there has to be a tie to some of the stewardship challenges that the park is facing, and Jesse will speak more to that here momentarily. And then again, we want to see your interest in science communication and just see what the potential is for working long term with Acadia and potentially other parks as well in your careers. And then the evaluation criteria here, again, I sort of talked about these here a little bit. Certainly potential to contribute to science communication education. Another piece I didn't mention on the previous slide. Qualification of the applicant certainly are important. We recognize there will be applicants at different places in their careers, and that a earlier career applicant is not going to have the same sort of depth of CV that a mid-career or later career applicant will, and we don't penalize earlier career applicants just based on the fact that they haven't had as much time doing their work. Okay, and then the schedule for this, the proposals are due November 15th by 5 p.m. Eastern time. They will then be reviewed by a panel of Schoodic Institute and National Park Service and external reviewers. These are individuals who are science literate, but may not necessarily be experts in your field. So it's important that your proposal is understandable and avoids unnecessary jargon. And then we'll make award notifications in early 2024, so March or April of 2024. We'll try to get those notifications out as soon as we can so that you can begin planning for your research. All right, next I'm going to hand it over to Jesse to talk a little bit more about Acadia.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So I'll go through a few slides here and kind of connect with what maybe we're looking for here at Acadia, or what kind of opportunities diving in. Think of what's your strengths, right? What your field of interest is. There's likely some way to kind of fit in here, but we'll go through just a few, kind of a few items where the park is really interested in. So Schoodic Institute is one of 17 research learning centers in the national park system. So they're throughout the country. This one, what's great about these RLCs, and especially now embedded within the park, we really are able to, the vision of those can really integrate into our resource management priorities. And so what you can kind of see here is that, as I mentioned, Acadia is a place that we want to be doing science. The RLC, and then this program really enable us to have managers and park decision makers working with and in line with researchers in the park, and having that infrastructure there is fantastic. So as Nick mentioned, right, and will be a continuous change. How do we deal with change? And so having these RLCs and these programs like these fellowships help us to adapt and respond quickly to continuous change. And then we also have, long-term goals that we're going for, and long-term, projections, and being able to react kind of quickly with just these shorter-term, quick couple of year projects can help us inform for decision making down the road. Next slide. Right. So what is the change? What has it looked like in the past century or so since the founding of Acadia National Park? With climate change in particular, but other like kind of landscape modifications over the century, we've seen some profound changes. Some examples are that we've lost 1 out of every 6 plant species that were documented and inventoried in the park more than a century ago. We've gained lots of non-native species. Some of these are invasive plants like purple loosestrife. We've gained new diseases like Lyme disease carried by black-legged tick. We've experienced declines in seabird populations and other wildlife populations. Oftentimes climate driven, and certainly oftentimes human influenced in other ways as well. We've seen some positive gains too, with like the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act in the 70s. We've seen a rebound of water quality and air quality, but that takes a lag, and so we've got all these changes taking place, and as we look into the future, we expect to see, not only warmer temperatures, increases in precipitation, in particular intensified precipitation events, coastal storms, coastline inundation, sea level rise, things like that. And what's also kind of interesting with those that aren't familiar with Acadia National Park and kind of our presence on the coast of Maine, not only do we have those kind of natural resources, plant and animal communities changing from kind of the southern to northern population extents, we also have human communities, oftentimes kind of embedded in this landscape. So the human kind of element is definitely part of this as well. Next slide, Nick. So the Park Service, for quite a while, for the greater part of its first century, kind of took an approach for resource stewardship, resource management that was protecting historical context and protecting and preserving historical conditions. Then it became, with a little bit of a thinking and reevaluation, and is that's not necessarily a realistic approach. And probably not one we need to be considering and working under that framework moving into a future of rapid change. And so instead of managing for these historical conditions, what we're doing as the Park Service in partnership with Schoodic Institute and others is trying to manage with change and for change, which requires us to think about a lot of interacting whole systems. Right, so we need to be taking a learning-based approach as we move ahead. We need to have an adaptive management approach, learning while doing. We need to engage communities and partners as well, and to think about what are our values. Certainly, we have our mission statement. We have our resource priorities, but how might those be changing into the future? So our management practices, will likely fail without this kind of more holistic framework and consideration. Next slide. One thing that is, excited to introduce, I suppose, or at least highlight, that's different from previous years of this fellowship, is that hot off the presses, we have what's called a resource stewardship strategy for the Park Service, done for Acadia National Park. We worked over the last year or so to provide this document that summarizes really what are our main resource priorities, looking at what are our threats to these resources, and then setting up goals and strategies as well. And so it really gets into quite a lot of detail, but it's a nice kind of a framework that provides, what have we kind of decided on, I suppose, but what really makes this place special? What are the threats coming into the system, and what are ways we need to think about over the next 5 or 10 year kind of framework that we need to be, where we need to be providing resources towards. I should mention, so that's a great document. It's up to date now. It's a great document to review and just kind of see how those may or may not align with your own interests. Of course, if they don't align with your own interests, that doesn't mean that your proposal wouldn't be considered, because we definitely need to be looking for our blind spots, looking at where we haven't necessarily considered something. So that's not to say that if you don't see how, in one of the priorities or one of the kind of strategies and goals listed there, that you shouldn't necessarily lose interest. I would say that should be the opposite. It'd be a great opportunity to provide some information and to provide, potentially some answers to some of those gaps that we don't have in there. So yeah, there should be a link there to that RSS. And I think there will also be on the last slide info for that.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Yeah, we can get that link into the chat as well at the end. Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about what we are looking for. And so successful proposals, again, have this high potential to increase understanding of and inform responses to rapid change happening in Acadia. As Jesse mentioned, we know lots of changes happening. 1 out of 6 plant species has disappeared over the last 50 years. The winter bird population has declined by 43%. We know 2 out of 3 trees in the park are projected to struggle under emerging climatic conditions. So it's definitely a theme of research and stewardship in the park. And then addressing these priority needs is a key piece to this, and really making sure the science is related to some of the stewardship challenges that the park faces. For example, a great proposal on whales would not rate well for Acadia National Park. The park's legislative boundary is the mean low tide line, and so National Park Service here in Acadia does not manage any ocean. So a great whale proposal, research proposal, will not rate well for this fellowship. Then certainly be cost-effective, reasonable, and achievable in terms of the scope and goals, and given the funding and your expertise and experience. And then probably making sure that that there's evidence that the applicant's committed to connecting their research to both management, but then also communicating it to many audiences. And what better than looking at some of the past fellows to get a sense for the types of research that have been supported. And if you go to the scsparkscience.org website, that has information on the 20 SCS fellows and the work that they've been doing. So I do encourage you to check out that website again, scsparkscience.org, just to see some examples of past fellow research. Working within a national park does require a research permit, and going through that process and getting an approved permit is required after you are selected as a fellow. And so we can certainly help with that process. It's fairly standard. There are 85 research projects per year that have research permits in Acadia. There may be some extra requirements for some types of research if there's specimen collection or working with cultural sites. But again, these things are all possible, and just the proper requirements have to be sought for these types of research. And will certainly help fellows meet permitting requirements. So it's not something to stress about, but just something that is part of this. And then mentorship and that little connection to scientists and managers working in Acadia is also an important part of this fellowship program, to really support those interactions with park staff and other scientists who've been working in the park, and really with the idea of that co-production of science model to make sure that really help you design your science in such a way that it can better build upon the wealth of science that exists in Acadia, and also then directly relate to the stewardship challenges. And then again, on the communication side, this is a critical piece of this. So making sure you set aside some of your time during the fellowship to work on communication and potentially education as well. There's opportunities to integrate some of your research into education and interpretive programs happening in the park. Okay, so last couple of slides now are the apply now section of the presentation. And so there is, if you go to the asf.scudicinstitute.org website, the application portal is open. Here's a screen capture of what it looks like. And so you submit all your materials, application materials, through this portal, and you can begin and stop and save and come back to your application during the process. And you set up a login and password for yourself, and then you go through the process here of uploading all of your information through the Acadia Science Fellowship application portal. It's fairly I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but definitely if you have any questions or run into any challenges along the way, just reach out to us. And let's see, is the email on here? Yes, at the bottom here. Questions should be sent to asfellow@scudicinstitute.org. So that's the email address, asfellow@scudicinstitute.org. There's also additional links here, certainly to the Acadia Science Fellowship, which can be found on the scudicinstitute.org webpage under the Science tab, and also under the nps.gov /ACAD, which is the Acadia website. Under their Learn section, you can find out more there. And the data and research bibliography and museum finding aids for national parks is irma.nps.gov. That's irma.nps.gov. And that's also the platform through which the research permitting process happens. And then also IRMA is where you can find the resource stewardship strategy for the park and download a PDF of it. And this is our last slide. So I'll stop screen sharing, and you can either put your question in the chat or raise your hand. We're, I think, a small enough group, we can you can voice your question.
Thanks, Nick. We do have some questions in the chat that we can start with. So the first question is about the lodging at Scudic Institute. Is the term for the whole field season, the whole summer, is one part of the question, and then the second is it family friendly housing?
Yes. Yeah, the housing is on the Scudic Institute campus which is in the Scudic district of Acadia, and it is subject to availability. So that is just the one caveat. It wouldn't be available through the entirety of the field season, say from June through October, but I would say it would be available at least half of that time. Sometimes they're just large groups on campus that where there may not be availability, but typically most of the time we are able to provide housing, and it's two-bedroom. Typically it's a two-bedroom apartment. We also have four-bedroom apartments for larger groups. So it is, I would say, family friendly for researchers.
But not dog friendly. So not
That's
pet friendly.
true.
Unless it's a service animal. Okay, the next question is from Jill. Wants to know if the application requires any recommendation letters or external letters of support.
So it doesn't require letters, but it does require contact information. I believe it's for two references.
And then just a clarification that the research permit is not required before submitting the application?
That's correct. Yes, it's not required before submitting application. It's something after you are if you are selected as one of the Acadia Science Fellows, then the next step is getting your permit approved as just part of the fellowship process, but it's not required beforehand.
And then another question is about funding. Does that go to the applicant's university or institution, or is it a personal check? And are there overhead costs allowed?
That's a very good question on that. So we can route it either way to universities, and we've done it both ways. We ask that overhead not be taken by academic institutions for this relatively small award. If it does go to you individually, you will just have to fill out the paperwork. And I'm forgetting now which, if it's a W-4 or 2 or I-9, one of those that you do have to fill out because it is sort of a monetary award that goes to you. But we can be fairly flexible on that and work with you on the best process for that.
And can the funds be shared to support a student?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, funds are often used for field help, whether they're undergraduate students or graduate students working on a project. So we often see the funding used to support that field help.
I don't have any other questions in the chat, but people are welcome to raise their hand or come off mute and ask. There is another question about the overhead, that, like, is it in the RFP that overhead can't be charged just in case it's required? Like the research office at the university needs to see that it's not allowed. Is that stated somewhere?
I believe it is in the RFP. Yes. Yeah, this has come up before, and it is written in there.
Someone's asked about communication, so I can answer that, Carl. So Carl wants to know a bit more about support for communication, if there's people with experience making radio shows, podcasts, YouTube clips about the project. So the communications training is really a bit more about strategy and planning and sort of our approach to communicating science, and then what tools you might use, whether that's podcasting or video or written forms, or whether you choose to do education, sort of depends on the project and is an outcome of that process. So if you were to identify that you needed further training, for example, in podcasting or video, that would be sort of an add-on. And so we don't go into the training sort of knowing what product you're going to create, but it's more thinking through what is an appropriate product for communicating with. That said, if you had a specific interest in developing a skill in a certain form of communication, I would encourage you to put that in your application, that you want to learn audio or you're interested in video. And so that's when we could help guide you to people that offer those specific skills. Schoodic Institute does support a podcast currently, Seed to Trees, in partnership with Acadia National Park. So we do have a podcast. We have less capacity for video, but we welcome the interest and would work to help make that happen. So it's pretty wide open. So some of the previous communications projects that previous fellows have done include things like learning how to write a press release and writing your own press release for your research paper, learning how to write more of an opinion op-ed kind of piece for a newspaper. We've had people publish in The Conversation, if you're familiar with that syndicated column. And so how can I write about my research in this sort of more personal way? We've had people who worked with students We've had art collaborations, and so there's a lot of different, it's pretty wide open in terms of what you do, and it depends on what you decide during that training. And then there's also sort of after the training, I'm available as well as any other sort of expertise you might need to help you develop it. So you're not on your own, but there's support throughout the whole fellowship. Another communications question is about 80 hours set aside for education and communication. Is this an estimate? Yes, this is an estimate, but there are known hours. So the workshop, the training itself has varied over the years from a 2.5-day in-person session with guest speakers to a 3-day virtual session of sort of 3 or 4 hours each day with a break in between. And then last year I condensed it to a single day. And so, but that training is at least sort of 9 to 12 hours. So the 80 hours is not just the training, but the actual activity. And I'd say it's a minimum.
And I think that's just showing that we're serious about communication being an important part of this fellowship. And it is an estimate, yes. And just to follow up on two of the earlier questions on references, yes, we do ask in the application process that you provide names and email and phone contact information for 2 references. And then on the overhead on page 4 of the RFP under the project budget and justification, it does read, fellowship funds cannot be used for institutional overhead.
I'll add one thing. As the Acadia managers here love to have like lunch and learns throughout the year, kind of a brown bag, just like it's fairly informal. And we would love to have these fellows come and tell us about their research. So this might be an opportunity to communicate in a pretty targeted audience of park personnel. And so we've had folks do that in person here if they're around, you know, during their field work or during their visit or after they've done a field season, or virtually. So just another opportunity that I don't know if it hits on exactly the 80 hours of communication, but it's definitely linked and helps with sort of, again, like this science for management of science kind of approach. And so I must say I have been appreciating those presentations from previous fellows.
Any other questions out there? I just put the email address again, asfellow@scudicinstitute.org. It's also in the RFP. So yeah, please reach out with any other questions and even ideas as well. Jesse and other resource managers can be available to talk through ideas. So thank you all for coming today, and we look forward to seeing your proposals and hope that you can join the community of science in Acadia National Park. Thank you.
Thanks. See you.